Okay, so let's unpack this. We usually think of addiction through a very specific cultural lens, you know?
Right.
The imagery, the chaotic spiral, the rock bottom, the whole train spotting aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly.
We look at it and we just think bad choices. We think it is entirely illogical.
We view it as a failure of will.
Yeah.
I mean, the prevailing narrative is that addiction is a moral failing or just a profound lapse in judgment.
Right.
The assumption is always that if the person just understood the consequences, if they just looked at the pie charts and the health warnings, they would simply stop.
Exactly. It is very much that just say no generation mindset. But here is where it gets really interesting for us today. Because today we are looking at addiction through a lens that seems on the surface to be totally contradictory to that chaotic image. We are looking at the intersection of autism and addiction.
It is a juxtaposition that really confuses people.
It really does, right? Because if you look at the pop culture stereotype of an autistic person, think Sheldon Cooper or The Good Doctor, what do you actually see?
You see rigid rule followers.
Yes, rigid rule followers. You see black and white thinkers. You see people who would theoretically read a rule book that says drugs are illegal and bad, and they would just say, okay, noted, I will never touch them.
Logic would certainly suggest that. I mean, if you thrive on structure and rules, you shouldn't be engaging in illicit substance use.
Yeah.
And yet when we look at the data, and more importantly, the lived experiences, that stereotype falls apart completely.
The reality is so much messier and, frankly, much more fascinating. And the source material we are doing a deep dive into today revolves around a breakdown by the creator, Paige Lale.
Right.
She is an autistic creator, and she completely flips this entire script. Her argument, which was a huge aha moment for me, is that autistic people don't use substances because they are rebellious or bad. They use them because they work.
That is the pivotal shift in perspective we need for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We have to move away from judgment and toward mechanics.
Yeah.
If we accept that the autistic nervous system faces a unique set of structural and sensory challenges,
It absolutely does.
right, then substances stop looking like party favors, and they start looking like tools. Dangerous tools, certainly, but highly functional ones.
And what I love about this is that Paige Lale isn't a doctor.
No, she's not.
And I think that is actually a massive benefit here. She is not lecturing us from a textbook.
Yeah.
She is coming at this with lived experience.
Exactly.
It feels like advice from a big sister who has been through the ringer and just wants to save you the trouble. It is completely devoid of shame.
Which is incredibly necessary.
Yeah.
Because if you approach this with shame, you miss the biochemistry entirely.
Yeah.
She is exploring the biochemistry of vulnerability. She is asking the hard questions like, why is the autistic nervous system so susceptible?
Right.
How do specific molecules unlock specific doors in the autistic brain? And what happens when those doors inevitably slam shut?
So let's start at the very beginning with the why. Paige introduces this concept of the autistic baseline. And I have to say, this recontextualized everything for me.
It is the foundational concept for sure. To understand the addiction, you have to understand the state of being before the substance is arguably even introduced.
Right before anything happens.
Exactly. For a neurotypical person, someone without autism or ADHD, the baseline, the state of just waking up and existing, is relatively neutral.
It is a zero.
Right, a zero. You might be tired or hungry, but your nervous system is essentially idling. Paige argues that for many autistic people, the baseline is not zero. It is a state of chronic dysregulation.
Chronic dysregulation. Let's really dig into that. What does that actually feel like on a physical level?
Okay, imagine your nervous system is a car engine.
Okay.
For most people, when they're sitting on a couch, that engine is idling at maybe 1,000 RPM. It is quiet, it is cool.
Nice and calm.
Right. But for an autistic person, that engine might be redlining at 7,000 RPM just from the simple act of existing.
Wow.
The oil pressure is high, the temperature is spiking, the fans are screaming,
Oh.
and that is before they've even left the house.
So simply being alive is basically an endurance sport.
Precisely. And Paige lists the specific contributors to this. First, there is sensory overwhelm.
Right, the lights and sounds.
But it isn't just saying, oh, that light is a bit bright. It is a physiological assault.
Yeah.
The hum of the refrigerator might sound like a jet engine. The tag on your shirt might feel like sandpaper rubbing raw skin.
That sounds agonizing.
It is. The brain isn't filtering these inputs out like a neurotypical brain does. It is processing all of them all the time at maximum volume.
And then you add masking on top of that redlining engine.
Yes, masking is the manual override of your natural instincts.
Right, pretending to be normal.
Exactly, the exhausting act of pretending to be neurotypical just to survive socially. It involves suppressing your natural movements like stimming, forcing painful eye contact, and scripting conversations in your head before you even say the words out loud.
I have heard it described as running an emulation software on a computer that wasn't built for it. It just eats up all your RAM.
That is a perfect analogy. You are burning an immense amount of cognitive energy just to appear acceptable. Then you add hypervigilance to that mix.
Constantly scanning the room.
Yes, constantly scanning to see if you were doing it right. Being terrifyingly aware that you might be missing a social cue and offending someone without knowing it.
And Paige brings up trauma here, which I think is a crucial connection. She makes a really strong point that the #1 precursor to addiction is trauma.
It absolutely is.
But she's not necessarily talking about a singular catastrophic event like a car crash or a war zone, right?
No, and this is a nuance we often miss in these discussions. She's talking about small t trauma accumulated over an entire lifetime.
The trauma of just existing in a world that isn't built for you.
Exactly. It is the trauma of invalidation.
Yeah.
It is growing up being told over and over that your reality is simply wrong.
Oh, man, yeah. Like people saying that isn't too loud, stop complaining.
Right. Or why are you crying? It's just a pair of socks. Or look at me when I'm talking to you.
That hits so hard. It is essentially gaslighting, but on a developmental level.
It really is. And it creates a fundamental distrust in your own body and mind.
Right.
And often there's intergenerational trauma mixed in there too.
Right, because autism is highly genetic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might have undiagnosed parents who struggled with the exact same dysregulation, and they couldn't model emotional regulation for you because they were barely holding it together themselves.
So you have this brutal cocktail.
Yes, exhaustion, sensory pain, social confusion, and a nervous system that never, ever rests.
So that is the setup. You are living in this chaotic, painful, loud state. You are constantly redlining. And then you discover something.
A substance.
Right? Maybe it is a beer. Maybe it is a pill. And for the first time in your entire life, there is silence.
Homeostasis. That is what the substance is actually offering. It is not about getting wasted or partying. It is about relief.
Yeah.
Paige describes this profound, heartbreaking realization she had. She asked herself, is this what it is like to be a person?
Is this what everyone else feels like all the time? That question is just tragic, but it explains the hook immediately.
It is the logic of survival. If you are in immense pain and you find a key that locks the door on that pain, you're going to keep turning that key.
Of course you are.
Drugs and alcohol effectively compel the nervous system to feel safety, connection, and control. And those are three feelings that might be completely inaccessible to an autistic person in their natural state.
Okay, so let's break down the toolkit here. Because Paige goes through what she calls a menu of escapes. And what is fascinating is that it is not random at all.
No, is highly specific.
Right? Different substances solve very different glitches in the artistic experience. It is almost like a prescription pad you write for yourself.
It is self-medication in the truest, most literal sense.
Let's start with the big one. Alcohol, the social lubricant.
This is a major one because of the social deficits inherent in autism. We talked about the RAM usage of masking earlier, analyzing every micro-expression, worrying about tone of voice.
Yeah, it takes so much energy.
Well, alcohol effectively shuts that analyzer off.
It is not just that it makes you brave, right? It makes you less detailed.
It dampens the processing. There is a psychological theory called the double empathy problem, which basically suggests that autistic people and neurotypical people just have fundamentally different communication styles.
And alcohol blurs that line.
Exactly. It lowers the inhibition. The underlying anxiety dampens. You stop overanalyzing your own words as they leave your mouth.
Paige says it actually allows you to mask less.
Yes. The paralysis of executive dysfunction lifts in social situations. You can just talk. You do not have to script the conversation 3 moves ahead like a game of chess.
Yeah.
You can just exist in the moment.
But I can see the trap there immediately.
Oh, it is a massive trap.
If alcohol is the only thing that makes socializing feel fun or even remotely possible rather than feeling like a grueling job interview.
Then it becomes a prerequisite for connection.
Right.
You cannot imagine going to a dinner party without pre-gaming.
Right.
Because without the alcohol, you are right back to the exhausting, grueling work of manual social processing. You become completely dependent on it just to be human around other humans.
Okay, let's pivot to weed. Cannabis. Paige talks about this one a lot, and her experience with it is really incredibly detailed.
Weed serves a very different functional purpose than alcohol. If alcohol is about social lubrication, weed is often the sensory dampener.
The sensory dampener. So this is for dealing with the bright lights and the loud noises.
Exactly. Think about that baseline fight or flight response we discussed. The world is sharp, invasive, and loud. Paige describes the effect of weed as her body finally exhaling.
Wow, just a full body exhale.
Yes, the trauma response switches off.
She mentioned that sensory experiences actually transform for her. They go from being painful to being enjoyable.
Right. Instead of the texture of a blanket being intensely irritating, it suddenly feels soft and comforting. Instead of music being an overwhelming wall of noise, it becomes immersive and layered.
And intellectually, she noted that her thoughts actually slowed down.
Which is crucial for the autistic brain. The brain is often racing with intense pattern recognition and generalized anxiety. Weed slows that spin cycle down to a manageable speed.
Now, here is where she said something that really surprised me. Because the cultural stereotype of a stoner is someone sitting on the couch eating chips and doing absolutely nothing.
The lazy stoner trope.
Exactly. But for Paige, weed actually helped her executive dysfunction. It made her productive.
This is a paradoxical reaction we see quite often in neurodivergent individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety can be completely paralyzing.
Yeah.
You look at a pile of laundry and your brain screams, "There are too many steps. I cannot start this." You just freeze. Weed quieted that screaming anxiety enough for her to just pick up a shirt and start folding.
It lowered the barrier to entry for daily tasks.
Exactly. However, she makes a very specific distinction here that I really want to highlight. Because we so often hear in popular wellness culture that CBD is the medical part and THC is the fun part.
Right. The non-psychoactive versus the psychoactive.
Yes. But Paige had the exact opposite experience.
Yeah, tell us about that, because she said she absolutely hated CBD.
She said CBD made her feel trapped in her body. It gave her the body load, that physical heaviness, but it didn't do anything to quiet her racing mind.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is a nightmare sensory combination. She felt physically sluggish but mentally panicked. THC, the psychoactive part, was what actually allowed her brain to sync up with her body. It really shows how individual neurochemistry is, especially in autism.
I mean, moving to the other end of the spectrum, stimulants. We're talking about cocaine or abusing prescriptions like Adderall or Vyvanse.
This is what we call the executive function aid. The problem being solved here is inertia.
Right.
It is that deep, heavy depression or autistic burnout where you feel completely stuck in the mud. You want to do things, but you physically cannot make your body move.
And stimulants provide the jumpstart.
They make you the doer. You become faster, sharper, and alert. It overcomes what is often called the wall of awful.
The wall of awful, I like that.
It is that invisible, heavy barrier between you and starting a task. But there is another significant layer here. Many autistic people also have ADHD. It is a very common comorbidity.
The ADHD profile.
Correct. And for those brains, stimulants can sometimes have a paradoxical calming effect. They provide enough dopamine that the brain actually stops frantically hunting for stimulation in the environment.
That makes sense.
But if abused, they provide a feeling of operating as a person should. You finally feel competent.
Yeah.
And for someone who has spent their entire life feeling slow, clumsy, or lazy due to executive dysfunction, that feeling of competence is honestly more addictive than the drug itself.
That is such a powerful distinction. You are addicted to the feeling of capability. Now, this next category is a bit heavier. Hallucinogens. Things like mushrooms or LSD.
This is the dissociative escape. The problem here is profound. Sometimes simply being you is inherently uncomfortable.
Right.
Living in a body that feels wrong, thinking thoughts that are just painful, repetitive loops.
So the solution is to pull the eject seat.
Complete dissociation. It is not just about seeing pretty colors or visuals. It is about not being you for 6 straight hours.
Wow.
It is a vacation from the self. It completely breaks the rigid patterns of thought that trap the autistic brain.
And Paige dropped a really specific warning here, right? A very practical nugget regarding mushrooms.
Yes, and this is crucial harm reduction information for anyone listening. She notes that if you are taking SNRIs, which are a common class of antidepressants often prescribed for anxiety or autism-related struggles, they can actually block the effects of psilocybin.
Because they compete for the same receptors.
Exactly. So she warns that you might take a dose of mushrooms and feel absolutely nothing, but the danger is that you might keep taking more nugger, trying to chase a feeling that is chemically blocked.
And that leads to major risks, right?
Yes, it can lead to serotonin syndrome, which is incredibly dangerous. It is a very specific physical risk that comes from mixing these substances blindly.
Finally, on the actual substance list, we have nicotine.
Nicotine is the utility player of addictions. It hits 2 distinct autistic needs simultaneously. First, it is a stimulant.
Right, a quick hit to the reward system.
A little dopamine spike, exactly.
Right.
But Physically, think about the actual action of smoking or vaping.
It is repetitive. The hand-to-mouth motion.
It is an oral stim. It is a repetitive sensory behavior that physically soothes the nervous system. But socially, it serves an even greater purpose. It is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card.
The smoke break.
A smoke break. It provides a completely socially acceptable excuse to leave an overwhelming situation.
Yeah, you do not have to explain yourself.
Right. You do not have to say, I am having a sensory meltdown and I hate the sound of everyone's voice right now. You just say, hey, I need a smoke.
And no one questions it.
No one questions it. And suddenly you are outside alone in the quiet regulating your breathing. It is a vital regulation tool disguised as a bad habit.
Wow. When you layer the social utility on top of the chemical utility, it is really hard to argue against the logic of it. But Paige doesn't stop at chemical substances. She broadens the definition of addiction to basically anything used to check out of reality.
This is a vital expansion of the conversation. Addiction isn't just about what you physically ingest. It is about where you go to escape.
Let's talk about gaming. Video games.
Control. That is the operative keyword here. In real life, an autistic person might feel they have absolutely zero control over their environment.
Right. The rules are constantly changing.
People are unpredictable. Sensory inputs are chaotic and overwhelming. But in a game, the rules are hard-coded. They never, ever change.
Yeah. If you press X, then Y happens. Every single time.
It is a highly predictable world. It is a dissociative escape where you are the master of the universe. You understand the physics of that world perfectly, unlike the real world, which is just exhausting.
What about the internet? I mean, we are all a bit addicted to the internet, but how is it different for this specific profile?
The internet solves what we can call the loneliness versus exhaustion dilemma. Autistic people often deeply crave connection. They are human after all. But they find the physical presence of other people incredibly draining.
So the internet is like the Goldilocks zone of connection.
Exactly. You can find your tribe. You can find people who love the exact niche, obscure thing you love without the sensory drain of smelling their perfume or maintaining eye contact or worrying about your own posture.
And it is asynchronous.
Right. You have time to think before you type.
Yeah.
You can mask perfectly with an edit button. It is socializing with all the scary variables removed.
And what about just passive consumption? Like mindlessly doom scrolling on TikTok.
It allows the brain to literally stop thinking. If you are watching someone else's life or watching a 4-hour video essay on a movie you've never even seen, you do not have to process your own thoughts.
Yeah.
It acts as a pause button for that relentless internal monologue.
She also mentions sex as a form of regulation, which I found really interesting.
Yes, and this is often overlooked in conversations about neurodivergence. She describes it as a hard reset for the physical body.
Like rebooting a computer.
Exactly. It is a massive release of endorphins and dopamine. But also think about the communication aspect of it. It is a way to be intimately connected to another person that requires very little verbal processing.
Right. There is a clear script to follow.
There is a script. It is highly physical. And the intense sensation overrides all the subtle, annoying sensations of daily life. It is a high-stakes physical interaction, but a very low-stakes verbal one.
And then there is food.
A classic regulation tool. Eating is a very powerful oral stim. Plus, modern food is highly bioengineered to hit those reward chemicals perfectly.
Yeah, the sugar and fat combos.
But for autistic people, this often ties into the concept of safe foods. If you have ARFID, which stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, you might rely on one specific food.
Like only eating a specific brand of chicken nuggets.
Yes, because the texture is exactly the same every single time. It becomes a reliable source of safety. Eating that food releases dopamine not just because it tastes good, but because it is safe in a wildly chaotic world.
And lastly, on the behavioral side, she talks about work, which sounds virtuous, right? It is the respectable addiction.
It is the absolute best place to hide.
Yeah.
Using productivity to avoid dealing with internal stress or messy emotions.
Right.
If I am working, I do not have to feel sad. If I am working, I do not have to deal with the unpredictable nature of my romantic relationship.
You just bury yourself in tasks.
Exactly. I know exactly how to be a good employee. The rules are clear. I do not necessarily know how to be a good partner, so I will just stay at the office.
It is avoidance wearing a suit and tie.
Precisely. And society actually applauds you for it, which makes it perhaps the hardest addiction of all to recognize and break.
So we have this entire menu of escapes. And Paige isn't just observing this from the outside like an academic. She shares her own personal journey, and it is a perfect case study of how this cycle starts and escalates.
It really is. It is a narrative arc that so many people will recognize.
Yeah.
She traces the vulnerability all the way back to her childhood.
Right. The precursors were there early on.
She talks about television being her very first addiction,
Yeah.
using it as a hypnotic sleep aid because her brain simply wouldn't shut off at night.
And she also had that influence of her father, right? She mentions he was an alcoholic.
Yes, and this creates a deeply complex dynamic for a child. She saw firsthand that alcohol worked for him. It clearly did something to soothe his nervous system.
But she also saw the massive cost of it.
Exactly. So she had this dilemma of, I won't do that because it destroys your life, versus I see clearly that it solves the immediate emotional problem.
But interestingly, alcohol wasn't her main struggle, and the reason why is just so perfectly autistic.
It is the sensory issue. This is such a validating detail for so many people.
Yeah.
She absolutely hated being sick. She hated the feeling of the room spinning.
The loss of control.
Yes. And the physical sensation of a hangover, the pounding headache, the deep nausea, was so entirely overstimulating and terrible that it acted as a natural deterrent for her.
It simply wasn't worth the sensory cost to get the social benefit.
Exactly. She had a built-in biological brake pedal for booze. But then came weed, and specifically the advent of the vape pen.
Right. The vape pen changed everything.
It changed the game entirely because of the dosage control. When she was younger, smoking a joint was unpredictable. Maybe get too high, maybe have a panic attack.
Yeah, you never really know what you're going to get.
But with a concentrated pen, she could take a tiny, controlled hit. Microdosing, essentially. Just enough to dampen the background anxiety without triggering the massive, overwhelming high.
And this is where the productivity trap kicked in. Because she says she started using it just socially, but then realized it made her, quote, stupid in a good way.
That phrase, stupid in a good way, is incredibly telling. She desperately wanted to shut off the overactive, analytical, pattern-seeking brain.
Yeah.
And initially, it felt like a complete superpower. She transitioned from using it occasionally on weekends to using it to write essays, to clean her house, to just comfortably exist in her body.
She said she was incredibly productive on it. She could write better. She could connect complex ideas better. It felt like a legitimate tool. It didn't feel like getting high. It felt like getting optimized.
And that right there is the most dangerous phase of any substance use, when the addiction masquerades as a productivity hack.
Yeah.
But inevitably then came the shift. The dependency set in. It became the immediate automated solution to absolutely any negative emotion.
Heartbreak, smoke.
Stressed about a work email, smoke.
The gap between feeling a bad feeling and actively numbing it just vanished. It became instantaneous.
There was zero processing time left. No resilience building at all. Just an immediate abort button on any form of discomfort.
So what was the actual turning point for her then? Because she didn't hit a typical rock bottom. She didn't crash a car, or lose her job, or get arrested.
No, and that is a very important point. Rock bottom does not always look like a dramatic movie scene. Her turning point was highly logical.
Right.
It was entirely consistent with her personality as what she calls a learner. First, it was strictly financial. She sat down and analyzed her budget. She saw she was spending about $120 to $150 a month on weed.
Which, hearing her father's voice in her head, felt like a massive waste.
Exactly. But the deeper realization was about integrity. And integrity is a core, rigid value for many autistic people.
Yeah.
She realized she was basically being two different people. There was the public sober page, who gave great advice on the internet, and then the private stoned page, who couldn't even drive a friend somewhere at 7 in the evening because she was too high.
That misalignment, basically feeling like a liar to yourself.
That caused her profound internal shame. The cognitive dissonance of living a double life became more painful than the prospect of sobriety.
So she designed an experiment, a strict 1-month break, just to answer the fundamental question, who am I when I am not high?
That innate curiosity is ultimately what saved her. She needed the data. She treated her own recovery like a clinical science project.
Which leads us to the really heavy part of the discussion, the true cost. Because if these drugs work so incredibly well, if they effectively solve the sensory issues and cure the executive dysfunction, why should anyone stop?
Right.
Page introduces this concept of atrophy to explain it.
This is the core argument against addiction in the specific context. And notice, it is not a moral argument, it is a functional one.
Okay.
Think of emotional regulation as the muscle in your body. Every single time you deal with a stressful situation naturally by taking a deep breath, by talking it out with a friend, or by simply waiting for the terrible feeling to pass,
Yeah.
you are doing a rep.
You are working out the muscle.
You are actively strengthening that emotional regulation muscle.
But if you use a drug every time you are stressed,
The drug lifts the weight for you. So your natural regulation muscles never get exercised at all. They go completely limp. They atrophy.
I want to challenge that metaphor just slightly.
Yeah.
Is it really atrophy? Or is it that for some neurodivergent folks, they never built the gym in the first place?
That is a very fair pushback. For many autistic people, they may never have been taught those natural regulation skills in childhood.
Right.
But the functional effect is identical. Whether the muscle withered away from disuse or never grew to begin with, the end result is that when the drug is removed, you are entirely helpless.
You completely lose your self-trust.
Completely. And Paige describes this so powerfully. She says, you prove to yourself over and over again that you fundamentally cannot handle reality alone.
Wow.
You create this devastating, self-fulfilling prophecy of your own incompetence.
It sounds incredibly infantilizing.
It is. It puts the user in a childlike state of dependency. You essentially say, I cannot do this hard thing. I need my blankie.
And the blankie is the weed or the alcohol or the phone screen.
Exactly. And relying on that blankie dramatically shrinks your world.
Shrinks it how?
You can only go to places where you can actively use your substance. You can only associate with people who accept or share the habit. Your social circle becomes smaller and smaller and smaller.
So the isolation just increases.
It skyrockets.
Yeah.
And for an autistic person who is already highly prone to social isolation, this dynamic is absolutely devastating.
Plus, there are the actual physical medical costs, and she makes a really specific, brilliant point here about autistic people interacting with the medical system.
It is the ultimate cruel irony of addiction. You start using drugs to deliberately avoid the pain and discomfort of life. But prolonged substance abuse inevitably leads to chronic health issues.
Right.
You get a smoker's cough or liver enzyme problems or severe dental issues from dry mouth.
And those physical problems lead to what?
Doctors, hospitals, needles, bright fluorescent waiting room lights, strangers physically touching your body without warning. You end up forcing yourself into the exact sensory nightmares you were originally trying to avoid. You endure the most overstimulating, uncomfortable situations possible, all because of the tool you use to escape discomfort in the first place.
That is a wildly vicious cycle. So how on earth do we get out of it? If the baseline is chronic dysregulation and drugs are the only thing that works instantly, what is the viable alternative? Paige calls her solution regulation math.
I absolutely love this concept. It appeals so much to the logical, structured autistic brain.
Yeah, break it down for us.
The main problem with drugs is the 0 to 100 factor. You are at 100% stress, you take a hit of a vape, and you are instantly at 0% stress.
Yeah.
Instantly, absolutely nothing natural in the human body does that.
Right. Taking a deep breath does not make you feel like you just took a shot of vodka. It is frustratingly subtle.
Exactly. And the central challenge of sobriety is accepting the reality that you have to do things the hard way now.
Yeah.
You have to radically accept that no single natural activity is ever going to offer 100% instant relief.
So the strategy is stacking percentages.
You have to build a comprehensive menu of small independent regulators. Let's do a simulation to illustrate this.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine you are Paige or a listener. You are at a 100% meltdown level of stress. You desperately want to reach for the vape. What do you do instead?
Okay, so I am freaking out. I cannot breathe. I want all the background noise to stop immediately.
Okay, first step, you pet your dog. That is co-regulation with another calm living thing. That gives you maybe a 5% relief. You are still at 95% stress.
I'm still freaking out. 5% is nothing.
True. So you keep going. Step 2, you go outside. You get fresh air and a change of visual horizon. That is a 10% drop. Now you are at 85%.
Okay, marginally better, but my chest is still tight and I am still highly anxious.
Step 3, you call a trusted friend. You engage in verbal processing and genuine connection. That is a big heavy lift or maybe a 30% drop. Now we are down to 55% stress.
Okay, I can finally take a real breath. I am not panicking as much.
Step 4, you exercise. You move the physical body to literally burn off the accumulated adrenaline and cortisol. That is a 25% drop.
Paige also mentioned a very specific physical trick, washing hands with warm water. Why does that work?
It acts as a highly effective sensory stim. But also, there is a neat physiological hack here. Putting your hands, or especially your face, in water can trigger the mammalian dive reflex, or at least profoundly soothe the immediate sensory receptors.
It forces you to ground yourself in your physical body.
Exactly. That gives you another 10% drop.
She also mentioned singing, right?
Yes, vagus nerve stimulation. Singing or even just humming deeply vibrates the vocal cords, which directly stimulates the vagus nerve. That physically sends a signal to your nervous system telling the body it is safe to calm down. Another 10%.
So the overall goal is understanding that if you are freaking out, you cannot just do one single thing and expect it to work like a drug. You have to do 5 or 6 things in a row. You have to actively work for your peace.
Precisely. It is significantly more work. It is way less efficient. It might take you 20 or 30 minutes to calm down instead of 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But, and this is the absolute key to recovery, doing it this way builds the muscle. It builds the profound self-trust that allows you to say, I regulated myself today. I actually did that on my own.
And she also has some strict boundaries now, right? She is not totally abstinent from everything, but she practices very rigid harm reduction.
She does.
Yeah.
Because she really knows herself now. She knows she lacks impulse control if a large amount of a substance is just sitting in her house.
Right, the temptation is too easy.
So her hard rule is she will only ever buy single-use amounts. If she is going to a specific party, she buys exactly 1 joint for that night, not a whole bag.
And she strongly prefers edibles over smoking now. Why is that?
Because of the built-in time delay.
Yeah.
This is honestly brilliant behavioral engineering on her part. Well, an edible takes an hour to an hour and a half to actually kick in.
Yeah.
So if you are having a severe panic attack right now in this exact moment, an edibles is functionally useless to you.
Yeah.
It will not fix the immediate intense problem.
So it completely forces her to use her other coping skills in the meantime.
Exactly. It totally removes the instant escape button from the dashboard. She has to sit with the discomfort while she waits for the chemistry to work. And very often, by the time the edible actually kicks in an hour later, she has already successfully regulated herself through other natural means.
That phrase you just used, sitting with discomfort, that seems to be the absolute hardest part of all of this. It honestly sounds like torture.
It absolutely feels like torture when your regulative muscles are severely atrophied. But it is the fundamental work of adulthood.
Yeah.
Paige talks very openly about the stark necessity of just letting yourself feel sad sometimes, letting yourself feel deeply disappointed or anxious without intervening.
Just letting it exist.
And realizing through exposure that the terrible feeling is just a wave. It will eventually pass over you without you needing to numb it. It simply will not kill you to feel bad.
Drugs work until they don't. That seems to be the ultimate takeaway here.
They do work splendidly. And the tragic cost of them working so well is the complete loss of your own internal ability to cope with human life.
This has been such an incredibly fascinating look at the logic behind what we usually just dismiss as completely irrational behavior. It completely reframes the addict not as a weak or bad person, but as a desperate engineer who is just trying to fix a broken machine with whatever tools they can find.
It absolutely reframes the entire conversation. We move from judging bad choices to understanding desperate solutions for a chronically dysregulated nervous system. It fosters a massive amount of compassion, not just for other people struggling, but for ourselves.
So to summarize what we have learned from this deep dive into Paige Lael's insights, autistic addiction is very often a highly logical, functional attempt to medically treat a nervous system that is chronically overwhelmed by the world.
It is a desperate quest for basic homeostasis. But while drugs provide a highly effective shortcut, they cause the severe atrophy of our natural emotional coping muscles.
And true recovery isn't about finding a new magic bullet to replace the old drugs. It is about committing to regulation math, building a complex stack of smaller, healthier coping mechanisms that eventually add up to real relief.
And through that process, regaining the vital self-trust that comes from knowing deep down that you can handle reality on your own terms.
I really want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on. Something the expert mentioned earlier really stuck with me.
If we look at the brain's primary fundamental job, it is simply to keep us alive and safe. In that functional sense, addiction, especially in this context of extreme sensory and emotional pain, in a very twisted way, an act of survival.
Yeah.
Your brain aggressively found a way to stop the pain. The real challenge for you, the listener, isn't just to stop the drug or stop the compulsive behavior. It is to do the incredibly hard work of building a life and an environment where that drug isn't necessary for your survival anymore.
So I want you to reflect on your own personal shortcuts. Are you using something? Maybe it is a glass of wine every night. Maybe it is scrolling TikTok for 4 hours until you fall asleep to skip the hard, painful work of actually feeling your feelings.
Right.
And if you took that shortcut away entirely, would your internal muscles be strong enough to hold you up?
That is the ultimate question. And if the honest answer is no, then you need to start lifting the small weeds today.
Yeah, start small.
Pet the dog. Wash your hands with warm water. Go for a walk. Build the muscle.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today.
It was a pleasure. Take care of your nervous systems out there.
We will see you all next time.